I'm James Turk. I'm a director of the Gold Money Foundation. I'm here today with Sean Fieler, who's a managing member of a very successful New York hedge fund called Equinox Partners. And Sean is also the chairman of the American Principles Project, which I'd like to discuss today. Sean, thanks you for joining me today. I'd like to talk to you about the American Principles Project, how it came about, your role as chairman, and what the American Principles Project is aiming to do.
Okay. Well, the American Principles Project was founded by Robbie George. This is back in 2009, and started with social issues. Started with Preserve Innocence Project, protecting our youth from bizarre social teaching in the schools, as well as Hispanic outreach. Hispanics are natural conservatives but vote largely as Democrats, and trying to address those two issues. I saw the success of the model and looked to create a parallel institution to take economic principles and apply them to the political process in the same way. And as a result of conversations that I had with Robbie and Luis back in the fall of 2009, we decided to merge the efforts instead of have me create a parallel effort. And the logic of the organization is really pretty simple, is that there exists largely now in the academy or with public intellectuals a lot of the heavy lifting that needed to be done to really take the values and principles that America needs to recover to the next level. I mean, really, a lot of that work's been solidified, and it just hasn't been applied to the political process. And so what we've done is, instead of writing another report that stays on the shelf somewhere, we've taken reports that already exist, or synthesized reports that already exist, and then go out and talk to legislators and lawmakers and get them to see what they can actually implement. And largely, our work has been at the state level, not at the federal level.
Why is that?
Well, legislators everywhere are conservative in the literal sense, in that they don't want to move too far, and certainly with economic issues, this is particularly true in Congress. And so we've just seen a body of legislators on both sides of the aisle that are willing to, in some cases, make positive changes, but so incremental that with issues like monetary reform, we've just gotten far better traction at the state level. And smaller amounts of money and persistence in combination with the Tea Party push from a year and a half ago. We took 23 legislative chambers nationally. We have 29 governorships. This is the Republicans who are really taking the lead on these reform issues. There's just a riper opportunity to work at the state level than there is at the federal level. We still have, obviously, a Democratic president and a Democratic Senate.
Okay. So the American Principles Project works hand in glove with the Tea Party groups around the country?
We do. We've co-sponsored a number of events, debates, bus tours with the Tea Party activists in various states. We've been particularly active with the Tea Party in Iowa and South Carolina.
What is it that the American Principles Project is trying to accomplish on the monetary sphere? Is it a return to the gold standard? Is it something different? Is it controlling spending? What are you aiming for?
So we have a two-track approach. At the federal level, we're trying to get Congress to introduce gold standard legislation. At the state level, we're trying to get states to reassert their constitutional role in monetary policy, and so to make possible the use of gold and silver in various states that are willing to take the necessary legislative steps. So with respect to the gold standard, that has been a very difficult push, even in terms of getting legislation introduced. Whereas at the state level, we've had quite a bit of success. A number of states are very frustrated with congressional inaction when it comes to an out-of-control Fed or an unaccountable Fed. And a number of states have been very keen to take up their Article 1, Section 10 ability to make gold and silver coin legal tender. And we've been working with a number of states trying to figure out the best way to do that. And I think that helps advance the work at the state level, as well as then puts pressure back on Congress to take some role or some leadership role in monetary reform.
So states first, then Congress eventually follows?
They're related, and one of the problems with the state action, as we'll see in Utah and we'll see in South Carolina, the key impediment to using gold and silver as final payment in America is the IRS interpretation of tax statute. So as states take all the steps that they need to take to make circulation of gold and silver as money possible, that federal impediment still exists. And so in an ideal world, you just go straight to the IRS and change the interpretation. But I think the strongest...
So that the metals could be used without tax consequences.
Exactly. It's not the legal tender per se of the U.S. dollar that makes the use of gold and silver practically impossible. It's the tax treatment. But going to Congress and asking them to remove, this tax status of gold and silver is kind of like going to Congress and asking them to implement the gold standard. It's a hard ask without political momentum. And so what's great about where we are with respect to the states right now is there's a lot of steps that they can take that are meaningful, move the ball forward, but at the other hand, don't require such a gargantuan leap of faith on behalf of the lawmakers that they're unwilling to move. So it seems to be it's a very good combination.
Are you involved in all of the state efforts? Is the American Principles Project involved in all the state efforts? There are at least, 8 or 10 states now that are looking at or considering legislation to reassert their rights on the monetary sphere.
We on a $3 million budget have limited capabilities, and gold is not the only policy we're pursuing. What we tend to do is allocate resources to a state as the legislation gains some momentum or it looks like it's going to be introduced. And so we wouldn't have known 8 months ago or even 6 months ago that Utah was going to be the first to move. But when it became apparent, really based on local initiative, that this was going to happen and gain some traction and needed maybe some outside assistance, maybe some outside advice, maybe there was something we could bring to the table to make the legislation either better or more politically possible, then we drop what we're doing elsewhere and go into that state. So just as we were very active in Utah going back 3 months, today we're very active in South Carolina.
Yeah, and that's providing educational information, working with the media. What types of things do you engage in when you're participating in these efforts to bring back some legislative changes at the state level?
A lot of it involves talking to and lobbying lawmakers, getting a sense for what their what the red lines are within what typically is a Republican caucus in these states. How do you mainstream it within? That's really the key question that we ask over and over again. How do you mainstream this idea within the Republican Party within Utah or within South Carolina? And so we do a lot of work amongst the elites that also has given them, I think, the cover, the kind of public space that they need to move. So, for example, if you're a middle-of-the-road Republican lawmaker in Utah, you're not one of the new Tea Party members that's risen up, but really have been in the legislature for a longer period of time, and you see a local Tea Party guy asking you to introduce something on gold, absent any broader discussion at the national level or amongst the elites, that's a harder ask. But if you see that ask in conjunction with op-eds in the Wall Street Journal or explanative articles in the Weekly Standard, and you see establishment figures from Washington coming out and helping you move that process through the legislature, I think that adds what gold has lacked for so long was just, a little more credibility, and to realize that it's not just people at the margins that are concerned about this, or not just people at the margins that really think this is the solution, but that this is, the logical answer given the problems we have.
And also founded from a constitutional basis that this is what the system is supposed to be, in terms of what the Constitution says and how it was put into effect with the Coinage Act of 1792.
Yeah, I think we found Article 1, Section 10 to be very helpful, so we're not relying on the 10th Amendment, which then puts you in a more marginal camp. The Coinage Act and have not been the key selling points. The legislators tend to be sensitive to what will or won't get a constitutional note within their states, we found, and are not every state legislator, as you can imagine, is not an expert in the history of, monetary policy. And so some of the historical nuances aren't the key things driving the legislation's legitimacy in a particular state. But I think the clear constitutional right of states to take these steps is a very powerful argument that does give them a lot of cover. I think that gives them a real comfort level with the steps that they've been willing to take.
Mm-hmm. The states where you've been involved, have you found the support fairly broad-based among the populace of those states, or the population of those states, or is it narrowly focused with just very powerful interest, smaller interest group that's bringing about this legislation? You have any experience in that regard?
Yeah, we've done some polling. So what we found that self-identified members of the Tea Party are quite well informed about issues of monetary history and problems regarding the Fed, and a solid majority of them want fundamental reform of the monetary system and the Fed, and that even in the aggregate we see of likely voters, 40+% that want some structural reform of the Federal Reserve. Now, how structural reform of the Federal Reserve translates into precise legislation, does that mean a single mandate, or does that mean the gold standard, or does that mean something in between? There's still a lot of wiggle room out there. You don't have quite the opposition at the state level from the business community that you do at the federal level. So whereas there's a number of very interested parties in keeping monetary policy easy and suppressing in the short term the amplitude of the business cycle, that they believe that monetary ease or the ability of the Federal Reserve to act does. You saw the Chamber of Commerce very active in defending QE1 and QE2. You don't see that at the state level because the states are not the direct beneficiaries of Federal Reserve action, because the Federal Reserve is, at least thus far, not bailing out states.
Also, perhaps there's a more direct relationship between the legislators at the state level and the population than there might be at the federal level.
I suppose that's true. I myself am not. I run a fund here in the city with my partner, so I'm not on the ground in these state capitals doing this. But I think they're certainly closer to their voter than the congressman living in Washington.
You mentioned the op-ed articles for the Wall Street Journal. I've read these; they're excellent. Can we talk about that a little bit, and particularly this last one? What was the response to that? Why don't you describe a little bit about it first, and then what the response was?
Yeah, the problem that we were having with talking about the gold standard, or talking about monetary policy in general, especially with legislators, is they felt it was not an area that they had sufficient expertise to weigh in on. And so I think as soon as we started to frame it in economic terms, we started with a problem. And this last article that Jeff and I wrote in the Wall Street Journal was, I think, quite successful in helping to reframe the debate about gold money, the gold standard, as a political issue, not simply one of monetary policy and what's the right growth rate for M1, M2, pick your M, or what's the right inflation rate, or which are all issues that legislators are just going to be almost instinctively unwilling to weigh in on, because in their careers, none of them will have had any direct contact or any policy experience with monetary policy. I think maybe very, very few exceptions. And so they're naturally uncomfortable. But once you frame it as an issue of an unaccountable government bureaucracy making decisions absent any oversight. In fact, in a way that really prohibits any congressional oversight. I think then that starts to make more political sense or intuitive sense to them, and that becomes an issue that they can weigh in on.
What was the response to the article? Was it, did you get a good response, and was it what you were expecting?
Yeah, it was very positive, much more positive than the response that we'd gotten to the previous two articles we'd written in both the Journal and then the article we'd written about Tom Hoening in the Weekly Standard. And I think that had to do with it being explicitly directed at politics and not monetary policy. I don't know if Ben Bernanke read the article, but I presume he wouldn't have been particularly pleased with it. But you know, it's not. There's no aspect, despite the you know, the challenge implicit in the article. You know, there's not really any scope to refute the facts. I mean, the conclusions follow very readily from the facts that everybody knows.
Did you see anything in the media where the Fed tried to apologize or make excuses for, you know, previous actions, which, you know, based on the facts that you identified in that article?
No, I think the
basically they ignored it.
Yeah, I think were I a PR advisor to them, I would have advised them to do the same thing. I think they risked making a larger issue out of it to the extent they tried to challenge it. And I'm trying to imagine how, on what grounds they would have challenged it. Would they have argued that you know?
Taken out of context?
Yeah, no, I don't think
quotes.
that's fair. It's not, you know, it's not out of context. I mean, when you go out of your way in congressional testimony to explain an action by defending that action as something that you would again defend on your deathbed, as Bernanke did with respect to the Lehman bailout, I mean, it's not an accidental, it's not a flippant comment. I think it's something that you know, is very central to what he believes was the proper role of the Federal Reserve. So I don't, you know, in no way do we suggest that these either Ben Bernanke or the other actors in the bailouts are doing this out of ill will. We're just simply pointing out the political reality of the actions that they've taken, and that were they to have, you know, were they to have overstepped what they defined as their legal authority and bailed out Lehman, who would have enforced that obscure statute that they had violated? It's immediately obvious that no one would have, and on what political grounds would have somebody done it? And I think that creates a problem, and does maybe perhaps has opened a few eyes to the reality of the structure, you know, the political structure we live in with respect to monetary policy.
Mm-hmm. For the benefit of the viewers who are watching this video, are those articles available on your website?
Yes, they are.
And so how can they...
So if you go to www.americanprinciplesproject.org.
Okay. And just look up the Wall Street Journal and the Weekly Standard articles.
I think it'll be under the, no, I haven't actually done this, but I know they're there. If you look up, we have our website grouped into issues, and if you were to go into the issues, you can scroll back.
Monetary issues, you'll find it.
You'll find it there.
What's next for APP? What are you working on now, and what's coming up in the near future?
Well, I think the, you know, solely with respect to monetary policy.
Yeah, I'm referring to monetary policy, which is my area of interest.
I think that the next big step will be proving that you know, Utah wasn't a one-off, and as we get another state and another state to take a similar step, and as the commissions formed by the states start to hold hearings, gather testimony, and you see that resonance amongst those states, that they're on the same path. And those states then, I think, jointly, implicitly, or in practice, you know, start to create that still lacking political momentum to get a more concrete think about the way we tax gold and silver transactions in a way that deprives states of their right to make gold and silver coin legal tender.
So a key focus will be to eliminate these statutory rules or whatever it is that requires gold and silver to be taxed at the federal level so that they can be used freely without any kind of tax consequences.
Yeah, exactly right. So, in the case of Utah, I mean, some states are going to have to put, some skin in the game up front, so to speak. They're going to have to remove their own taxation of gold and silver transactions.
Like Utah did.
Utah didn't have any, but, like as we hope South Carolina will. Okay. And then the other key aspect of it will be, with that effort on the table, then asking for the IRS to change its interpretation, which is unlikely in a political vacuum or in a political moment that we have today. But I think if the desire of the states to reassert their rightful role in monetary policy is made clear and becomes more politically acceptable nationally, that ask becomes stronger, and you could see the IRS move under threat of congressional action or in combination with congressional action. But obviously,
or attorney generals threatening to bring suit in the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I think
under Article 1, Section 10.
I think the I think the courts are not the obvious way to pursue this. I think certainly there is, legal recourse, but I don't think that's the. I don't think that's the right way to approach it. I think you make a very strong ask as you generate political facts on the ground in a number of states, and I think the political process really, instead of the legal process, will be the most beneficial way to go about this.
If people want to learn more about American Principles Project, best way, go to the website?
Go to the website.
And can they make donations if they agree with your objectives and aims?
They certainly can, yes. We're actively courting a number of donors, and we'd welcome more.
Okay. Sean, thank you very much. This was a real pleasure to meet with you and have the opportunity to talk about APP and what you're doing and what you intend to accomplish. Thank you very much.